Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from The Weeknd, titled Beauty Behind the Madness. Well, it's been quite the road to get to this point, because if you had told me that the guy making bleak, shamelessly debauched party songs reveling in self-destructive nihilism now has a fair few of the biggest hits thus far of the past year, I probably would have called you crazy. But now here we are, and now it's time for me to make a definitive statement on The Weeknd, Canadian R&B star who surged through the underground with his goth-tinged debauchery before getting recruited by Drake to break into the mainstream. And to say that The Weeknd is a complicated artist is kind of understating it. In the process of preparing for this review, I revisited both the mixtape compilation, Trilogy, and his debut, Kissland. And putting aside the fact that they're both way too long and underwritten to really support themselves, The Weeknd is an odd sort of artist, at least for me. On the one hand, I like it when his production steps into the pummeling, groove-heavy darkness, the sort that dominated the second and third mixtapes in Trilogy, the excellent Thursday, and the quite strong Echoes of Silence. On the other hand, if it didn't have that momentum or atmosphere or grit, the songs nearly all went long and could start to blur together, even despite some nifty sampling. I did like that most of his songwriting did improve to tell more complicated stories as Trilogy proceeded that owned their framing of The Weeknd as a shameless, sex and drugs depraved artist spiraling out of control, and he knows it and owns it, and the women that would be drawn to that pseudo-romantic persona. But it's very easy for that melodrama to lose some of its dark, enticing flavor as it just repeated itself over and over again. As I've said, nihilism just gets kind of boring after a while if you don't vary up the formula. But I think my biggest hang-up on The Weeknd has always been his voice. But I think it's less of an issue of his voice itself and actually sounding engaged on the song. When he tries, he can be a potent presence behind the microphone. When he doesn't try, he's not a presence at all. Either way, enough of it came together for The Weeknd to get signed and release his debut album, Kissland. A prime example of why it can be a dangerous thing for acts like The Weeknd to get a major label budget. The record sounds so opulent and huge, but it pitched out so much of the atmosphere and grit to get there that the tracks become nowhere near as immersive, mostly courtesy of The Weeknd leaving behind the majority of the producers that got him to the top, especially Elangelo. Coupled with lyricism that seemed to devolve straight back to his oldest material, and were again repeating subjects that he had tackled before with an even more delicate falsetto. Again, not the best choice for this sort of material. I couldn't help but consider Kissland a real disappointment. Not a terrible album, but definitely not a good one. And then two things happened in rapid succession that took The Weeknd straight to the top of pop culture. He collaborated with Ariana Grande in the absolutely amazing song Love Me Harder, one of my favorite songs of 2014, and 50 Shades of Grey happened, where he landed on two songs on the soundtrack, including the smash hit Earned It, which really wasn't any good at all, if I'm being honest. That said, I had reason to believe that Beauty Behind the Madness would at least be interesting here. For one, he pulled Elangelo back on board, and for another, some of his features and producers list suggested some obvious collaborations like Lana Del Rey and Kanye West, and a few pretty surprising ones like Max Martin and Ed Sheeran. It also looked to be less bloated than his mixtapes and Kissland, which was only a positive step. So, did we find actual quality behind Beauty Behind the Madness? Well, it's an improvement on Kissland, I can say that, as it shows The Weeknd bringing more experimentation and comfort to the larger, more impactful instrumentation that he's trying to utilize, but it's an experiment with some mixed results pretty much across the board that ultimately leaves me feeling a little bit cold here, especially when I look at the actual content. And the frustrating thing is there are definitely moments where he gets close to something that shows the shifts in the style could have worked. There are nuggets of brilliance all over this album, except they seldom make up an entire song, let alone a record. In other words, there are elements that I like here, just not enough to build a complete album, which means this is only kind of decent instead of being great. So let's start by talking about some of those elements in the instrumentation and the production. In terms of instrumental tone, the album hasn't departed that far from the melancholic melodrama that's driven really all The Weeknd's material, but we're getting more distinct flavors of it, some that work better than others. In some cases, we get more of the symphonic bombast with walls of strings and bleak pianos that work surprisingly well on Real Life, especially with those choppy strums on the outro, or the Jim Steinman Angel with a soaring synth that sounds like he's trying to remake Total Eclipse of the Heart. And yet on the opposite end, we get the stately yet very stiff Earned It that's about as unsexy as the 50 Shades of Grey movie that it's soundtracked. Or take Losers, which features some great multi-tracking on the bridge and a really good underlying melody on most of the keys that I really liked until we get an overloaded popping beat that doesn't have enough groove to match the unstable jittering keys of a big brass band that ends out the song. Or take the Stab at Soul and Tell Your Friends, courtesy of Kanye West production, that then juxtaposes it with these blocky walls of synth that don't match the sample at all, or show up all over this album to varying impact, almost exasperating when they aren't even on tune on Prisoner. Or take the outright stabs at pop, this scream of trying to emulate Michael Jackson like on Can't Feel My Face, which blows a great crescendo on a bass-heavy and completely inert vocal delivery from The Weeknd. Or the windswept percussion-heavy In the Night, which actually works pretty damn well, even though half it feels swamped under the massive low-end synth wobbles. Granted, if we're looking at swallowed up and swamped mixes, look no closer than The Hills. Probably the closest thing this record gets to Thursday-esque grit and darkness, so in other words, I was inclined to like it, and yet the bass is cranked up so loud in the mix it drowns out nearly everything else. And the exasperating thing is that it's so leaden that the beat never gets the crackling intensity that it really needs until the very end of the song. Now granted, there are moments that connect better, like the buzzing trap percussion augmenting the pummeling smoky darkness of Often, the faded bleakness of Shameless with its acoustic guitar, or the spiky strums courtesy of Ed Sheeran on the grimy Dark Times. That really just sounds like a Hosier outtake that squanders some great atmosphere by bringing in a full string section at the end that's way too clean. Again, what's frustrating here, there are good ideas, but they feel squandered by sloppy mix balance and The Weeknd's bad tendency to let us all fade into dreary outros, which are mostly fine when you get guitar solos like on Shameless and Tell Your Friends, but auto-tuned and pitch-shifted warbling? Yeah, not my thing, not so much. Granted, part of the issue is The Weeknd himself. Multiple times throughout the course of this album, I wondered why his material wasn't hitting me nearly as hard as it was trying for, but really it's the same issue that I've had with him across his entire career, in that he's incredibly inconsistent on the microphone. When he sounds tight or visceral, even just petulant like on Shameless, he can make his impressive vocals land a lot of impact. He has range. But throughout the most of this record, we're stuck with his shapeless tenor warbling through songs, and it's just too underweight at that register to match up with his instrumentation. It worked on the grimmer moments of Trilogy because it was often masked in fuzz or reverb or lo-fi grit. Or even on this album, where there are some multi-tracking that gives him the presence that he needs, but without more baritone in his voice, he can feel swamped by his own instrumentation, he can feel drowned out. And that's presuming we find moments where he can be obliged to give a shit about what he's singing. And yes, I know that disaffection is an underlying trait of his, but I'll say the same thing about him that I say about Lana Del Rey, who actually gives a pretty decent performance on this album on her track Prisoners. If the artist doesn't care about the song, why should I? Now granted, this album might be the first where The Weeknd is forcibly confronted with the possibility that he might actually care, which takes us to our lyrics and themes. Now, you could easily be forgiven by thinking that most of this album falls into The Weeknd's conventional brand of debauchery, but there is a little bit more variation in the details here, as The Weeknd not only comes to grips with his new success and fame, but also that his lifestyle has proven depressingly influential. Now, if the album was a little bit smarter and make more commentary on that fact, how The Weeknd chose that lifestyle for himself, and he's fully aware that nihilism will drag him into the pit of his own free will, and how that path definitely isn't for everyone, but instead more interested in confronting the fact that The Weeknd that he might have some feelings for some of the girls that he's screwing. If we're looking for a source of drama on this album, maybe watching The Weeknd grapple with this newfound affection, these newfound emotions, which manifests as numb exhilaration on Can't Feel My Face, the artificial distance he's tempted to create an acquainted and really not good distance, or the shameless sniping at the girls who are cheating on him on The Hills or Shameless, to the odd empathy he shows the dead-eyed stripper on In the Night, or the girl that he lets go free on Angel, the one who gets away instead of succumbing to the darkness. Probably the most intimate moment we get is as he tries to get the girl to open up to him on As You Are, and in the outro, he flips it so he can show more of himself. He wants to confide and it can go both ways. But here is the biggest problem with the narrative arc on this album. It feels like a half measure at best. The Weeknd begins the album certain that he's not interested in love or even capable in love, and by the end of the album, he's still walking that dark debauch path. Hell, with Lana Del Rey's presence on Prisoner and Ed Sheeran's bars about alcoholism on Dark Times, he found even a couple companions clinging to the same addictions. But The Weeknd ends this album where he started, alone and convinced he's not worthy of love because he's such a sinner. And as much as this album tries to wring so much potent drama out of him learning to care, a lot of it feels forced and kind of undercut because there's no satisfying conclusion. The Weeknd is convinced throughout the majority of this record that he is not going to change. And even if he has learned a little bit of empathy, I get no satisfaction because The Weeknd doesn't do anything that's all that different. He admits that his life is dangerously empty, and yet there's no change on his part. So much as this album just cranks up all the beats and the bombast and symphonic swell, the melodrama just feels kind of really forced and not nearly having the same texture that made his earlier material so compelling for me. So look, in the end, this isn't a bad album, but I'm struggling to find more reasons to care about it and like it, and I'm not finding much, and that's not a good sign. Part of it is the Weeknd himself. There might be much more of a story here, but so much of the beats feel recycled from his better albums with more grandiose production, trying to get us to care when even he doesn't. And while there's a part of me that thinks that a better, more earnest R&B singer like Usher or maybe Miguel could have made this work with more expressive charisma, it still wouldn't solve the production issues or the bad mixing or the occasional sloppy songwriting, repeating syllables and words to fill up a space, or the fact that, again, this album runs a lot longer than it should in terms of its content. For me, it's a light 6 out of 10 and only a recommendation if you're a fan. Otherwise, I don't know, check out Thursday or Echoes of Silence. They're a lot more impressive and potent than this is. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I may be able to do to improve my presentation, or anything else coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give it a listen. Just keep it civil in the comments here, folks. I really wanted to like this album, and there are moments I like, just not enough of them. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.